Previously, the Irish Americans promoted this very, it was a leprechaun-infested shamrock Disney idea of Ireland that was never the reality. You know, cottages and boreens and Devileras, comely maidens dancing at crossroads, and it was never the reality. But I think that that was created here by the Irish Americans because the reality they left in Ireland was so grim and bleak that they really didn't want to dwell on that. They wanted to create something else. So they sort of created this myth, this sort of last Eden in a world of savage states. This glorious myth of Ireland was created.
There's this unbelievable phenomenon around the world which I kind of called I refer to it as post-Riverdance traumatic stress disorder. I think when people think of Celtic now, the first thing they probably think of outside of Ireland, they probably think of Riverdance.
Riverdance worked or tapped into the consciousness of this country because it allowed people in this country to acknowledge something that had been part of the culture for so long but was suppressed.
Riverdance, as we know, is supposed to be Irish, and all the suit men thought it was wonderfully Irish, you know, celebrated it. But of course, Riverdance is a celebration of Broadway, Busby Berkeley, and miniskirts, and it's terrific entertainment. But Jesus, it's a long way from Irish.
The word Celtic is used so much now that it has as much meaning to me as chocolate. I don't know what it means anymore. It certainly doesn't cause me to feel any connection with myself or my roots. I don't relate to that word anymore. Maybe I was never meant to. I just see the word as a marketing tool now.
Dublin had been derelict, boarded up, bushes growing out of buildings. Now this fin de siècle Ireland had opened its heart to the European continent. There were contraceptives available. The church's austere power was fading. Censorship was relaxed. Highways built with EU funds were crisscrossing the country. An area by the Liffey River had been renovated and was packed with bars, Italian restaurants, nightclubs, and art galleries.
Dublin has changed so dramatically in the last 5 years, and there's money, wealth. I mean, even driving around Dublin and you're just looking at the cars that are huge, big cars, and amounts of wealth that we never even thought or dreamt of.
Well, I remember when I lived in London, a lot of the Irish people that I hung around with, we used to sort of look down their noses, the English people, how boring they were, that all they ever talked about was clamping and their cars. Now you hear exactly the same conversations replicated almost word for word in Dublin. Clamping and how long it took a person to get to their meeting point, 2 hours on the road, blah, blah, blah. And an irksomeness, constantly complaining about things,
Simple pleasures that characterised what I would love about Dublin have been diminished. In the city centre in Dublin, Bewley's was always a place where you go in and you buy a cheap cup of coffee, and the world and its mother could be there, and it was a very easy place, a big barn, well, it was a lovely building, but a big space of tea rooms. Very public space that everybody would know. It was like almost Where'll I Meet You, Bewley's. It was like straight off the cuff like that. Whereas now it's not like that. It's not as inviting. It's much more expensive. And because it's become like that, that sort of general public space where there was one destination that you knew exactly where you stood and it was a kind of leveler sort of place doesn't exist anymore.
There is a sense now in Ireland that the landscape is uncertain, that you can't depend on the physical things, that Ireland is changing at such an enormous rate that it's actually becoming unrecognisable. I went driving out through one of the suburbs of Dublin during the weekend. I suddenly was lost. I was on roads I'd never seen before. The whole landscape had changed. You know, I think for most older Irish people, as they wander around this changing landscape of Ireland, which literally changes by the day, you know, that they feel almost like strangers in their own land.
I think that the country, the physical country, the country that is part of your experience growing up and your experience looking out at it, enters first of all and stays in your memory and then comes out as an image.
I think the Irish have always been very good at storytelling, and both from the old Shanachie to literature, and I think this is another form of literature in a strange way, the film. Hitherto it's been very expensive medium. One of the reasons somebody said that the reason why the Irish were good at literature was pencils were cheap, but paint and clay was a bit more expensive, so we didn't exceed in that. However, we are exceeding in all the arts at the moment.
There is an explosion of artistic endeavour in Ireland. It's just unbelievable. I noticed it like 10 or 15 years ago. You started to notice all these jewellery in jewellery shops around Dublin with Celtic designs. It is quite staggering that a country of such a small population could produce so many writers and singers and musicians and dancers, and you know, I don't know how many brain surgeons we've produced, but it seems as though in the area of expressing ourselves we seem to have an abundance of resources.
Effectively, in any culture, in any society throughout the world, the arts has a very specific function, and its function, I think, is to articulate the things that cannot be measured in economic terms, in pragmatic terms, that can't be put on flow charts and end-of-year reports, financial reports.
In the Celtic period, the artist, particularly the poet, had an honoured role in society as a kind of a seer, a visionary. And that was also true in the last century, the 20th century, when emerging from the Civil War, people who'd been involved in Republican politics and in the whole Civil War mess, as artists stood outside that and gave it an honest critique.
I think of the role of vision, if you like, or of the envisaging of what happens through artists. I think of it as being like what happened to St. Brendan and his monks when they were in the Atlantic Ocean. In the Voyage of St. Brendan, this medieval tale of his wanderings, the monks and St. Brendan, in desperation, end up on this little island one night as the night's coming on. They set up, they build a fire, they huddle around, they are in security for the moment. In the morning, the island turns over and they jump into the boat again. They had actually were pulled up on the back of a whale, which was in the middle of the ocean. So that, to me, is an image of, you know, of then you inherit, you come to rest upon one set of securities, and but history and the night or the daytime of history changes the things, and the island turns over, and you're up to it again. You have to actually re-envisage, find it again, find it or found it. And that is actually one of the immemorial calls, I think.
Why do you go to a movie? Why do you go to the theatre? You go because you need something about your life expressed that can't be expressed in the monetary world, in the pragmatic world, in the real world. And the danger, I think, now with the arts in Ireland is that we're not doing that we're sort of succumbing to the economic mythology, that we're succumbing to some sort of vision of success, and that success has become the important thing, not to do good work, not to do something that, you know, will in some way illuminate the time or will leave some legacy.
It remains to be seen, I think, if Irish artists will continue to perform that necessary function, standing outside their society, examining it, dissecting it, trying to help to form a moral base for it, as Joyce said, forging in the smithy of his soul the uncreated conscience of our race. Now, in my opinion, the conscience is never fully created for a race. Every generation has to forge it anew.
As a filmmaker, it's the grey areas that I'm interested in. I made a film a year or two ago called All Souls Day, which is a very dark love story about the relationship of a man who had killed a young woman with that young woman's mother and their ensuing sort of romantic involvement. So it was a very dark film, a very violent film in some ways. There was a certain criticism that it was very unpolitically correct and that, you know, why did the beautiful young woman always have to die and all these things. And it struck me at the time, as I talked about the film to people, that, you know, if, for example, in the case of that film, if as a man one can't explore the darkness of being a man in the arts, where can you do it?
Film is like every other art form in Ireland at the moment. It's a mode of expression which is reflecting all the changes that are happening and that have happened.
I think we're starting now to get young writers and young filmmakers thinking in a contemporary setting. I mean, for too long, I think, we made films about the past, and now we've got to make films about where Ireland stands at present and possibly into the future. I mean, this is a relatively new industry in this country. Although we've been going to the cinema for many, many years, and we are said to be one of the great cinema-going attendances, or have the great cinema-going attendances in Europe, it's fair to say that the actual production side of this industry is relatively new to this country.
The feeling I would get about it in talking about Irish films, I suppose there's been a tradition for a couple of years that, you know, people have to resolve some childhood angst, or, you know, have to, you know, rather than just saying, listen, tell us a good story, and, you know, or pure entertainment, or, you know, so I think there's been too many Irish films made which have to kind of explore something about our cultural identity and, you know, like a teenage angst about religion or about the oppressiveness of the church or the Christian brothers whacking you across the head and tell you, fear God, you know. You know, we're coming out of that now, and I think there's a lot of interesting films coming out of the country now, and you know, I suppose the film industry is growing up too in the country.
There is an expectation on the part of the Irish Film Board that filmmakers in this country will go out and pre-sell their products in the United States or Europe or wherever in order to fund those. And the Film Board comes in as a support mechanism. And we've a very, very good
independent sector here. I mean, the likes of which has done very, very well abroad. I mean, people like Jim Sheridan, Neil Jordan, Paddy Brannock. I mean, there are a number of directors now coming out of this society.
If you're trying to develop a film at the moment, when you're financing it, if it goes over if it goes over £2 million, say, right, immediately you're into the financial realm where you're going to have to get American money into the film, probably, So that means then that they say, well, this film is too small, because American distributors don't want to make small films. It's not worth their while. If they can make 5 big films, why make 20 small films? Because this 4 times as much work doing that. So they want to make the films bigger, which means then that if you're going to make the films bigger, they have to be more concept-driven generally, or else star-laden. So it's that you're dealing with those things. So they're all the influences that affect the way that you develop a film. You're saying, well, if that's a reality that exists, how can we engage in that reality and still manage to do what we want to do? And that's what I spend all my days thinking about.
I think most Irish films are funded by Irish money, but the bigger budget films can't be. I mean, it's impossible to expect a country that has a population of 3 or 4 million to support a feature film.
You try and raise some money in this country to get a film made, and that's a really difficult, long, hard slog, especially if it's an Irish film, because a lot of the people here are not interested in making Irish movies. They're trying to make movies that will appeal to the world, to appeal to American audiences. I mean, it's very important that you appeal to an audience, but a lot of Irish subject matter is ignored and considered inappropriate for film. Most of the people who call themselves producers here are really no more than glorified lawyers and solicitors and accountants who really are after their percentage of the total budget. There are some serious filmmakers here, but they're not always the obvious ones. It's a tough road, and the reason why I'm speaking the way I am is that there is this rosy picture that somehow with the Celtic Tiger and Irish filmmakers are finding an easy way and an easy path through this. It's not. There's not a lot of encouragement. It's tough, really tough for Irish filmmakers.
The Danish filmmakers I have a lot of respect for, who do the films without money and say you don't need lights, and that's all great, because that's fighting the big monster system at the point where it's weak, which is making something cheaper and more believable and more realistic. It's not kind of going in the middle saying, well, we need 3 million to make our film, just a bit like Hollywood, but not really. I mean, all those, and they're not even in the English language in their hit films. So I'm not buying anybody who's saying, they can't make a film for money. Just look at the Danish guys. There's 2 of them there. 3 of them made great films.
I think what the film industry needs here is just a period of continuous growth. Just that you can consolidate on talents, that people can learn the lessons from their mistakes. I think, the industry needs to have been going for a certain amount of time before people can develop the types of companies that know how to deal with an international market and can engage in that, but yet preserve your own identity within that as well.
Film is like the way music was in the early 70s. David Bowie and Queen, and they were selling records like millions upon millions. And then punk rock come along. Well, film is going to have punk rock come along very soon. But I don't know whether it'll come out of Ireland or anywhere like that.
Accelerator is basically about a race between a bunch of Dublin joyriders and a bunch of Belfast joyriders from Belfast to Dublin. And when we were starting to look for funding for it after we did the first draft, basically Irish producers, people we would have been working with, told us there was no point in looking for funding from the Irish Film Board. or the European script fund, because they said they just wouldn't be interested. It was too contemporary, it was too exciting, it was too modern, it was too much of a possibility of it being commercial and people actually going to see it. And it was almost like the perception was that the only films that could possibly get made were in some way heavy, too personal films that were, that wouldn't get a large audience. So we applied to the Film Board and the European Script Fund, and we got money from both of them straight away. One of the things that was a huge part of the whole design and shape of Accelerator for me was to make it as different to all the other Irish films that had gone before as possible. So, I mean, in the design we used an awful lot of blue and silver, because I always think there's too much orange in Irish films anyway, to make it as modern looking as possible. I mean, it's essentially a road movie that takes place at night, so it's hard to get buildings in anyway, but wherever we could, we got in modern buildings, a totally modern look as much as we could. The style of acting is very much realistic. It's much more intense kind of realism than you'd normally get in Irish films. The fact that there's fast cars flying around the place and crashing and stuff, that's not something you get in Irish films very often. What I wanted to do was reflect the reality of what's happening in Ireland at the moment. And I mean, any festival I've brought it to, people are coming out at the end of the screen and saying, "My God, is it really like that in Ireland?" And I'm saying, what bit are you surprised at?
I find that people with either specifically relevant local voices aren't heard, or people of a vision that doesn't suit the international format don't get included. So I find often it's more interesting looking elsewhere than what is presented in the confines of the art world.
We have to be very careful nowadays in this new kind of corporate Ireland that we're not repressed by the mythology of economics, that the mythology of success, monetary success, doesn't repress us in the same way that Catholicism repressed us, and that suddenly Ireland's all so progressive and developed and so wonderful and so successful and so confident and all this sort of rubbish that you hear, that suddenly we can't admit to anything else. We can't admit to the fact that in areas of Cork, Limerick and Dublin there are areas which are slums, where people are living on a pittance, where they don't have the basic conveniences of normal life. There are areas of working class suburbs of Ireland where there isn't a public phone, where there isn't a shop, where you have to walk 5 miles to a bus stop. Now this is the Ireland that you don't see. This is the Ireland that I, driving into Dublin through the affluent suburbs of South Dublin, don't see. But it's there.
I am an angry man, yeah. I bet it when I can, yeah. On the bag, mat the skag. The negativity, yeah. Pushed on the young party, yeah. Is a shame. Who's to blame?
When I was a kid growing up around here, it would have been a very homogenous place. It would have been a place where 2 and 3 generations of the same family lived. My own family was like that. My father's side of the family lived in this area for the best part of 100 years. There's a lot of poverty there that you weren't really aware of as a kid, but it was an easy place to live back then. There's a couple of parts of this community. All the statistics show that you can't really find anywhere else in Ireland that's as impoverished in terms of unemployment, in terms of all the social kind of problems that come along with that, resulting more recently in the last 15 years, a large amount of heroin abuse in the area. This is one place that the Celtic Tiger doesn't roar very often.
found myself beginning to use the camera, initially not knowing exactly where to go with it, but eventually it became clear that I wanted to document ordinary day-to-day life in the place. I think I was interested in on the one hand showing the kind of deprivation in the physical environment, but at the same time showing the people being a kind of resilient people who've managed to keep their humanity in the midst of much suffering, really. Anybody who engages as an artist in processes like the ones that I'm involved with locally here is living in denial if they claim that their work isn't political. It is political. As soon as you talk about alienation, marginalization, etc., you're using kind of language that leads you into a political analysis.
It just seems that politics and the personal are intertwined to me. It's almost like Bobby Sands said that, if you're not part of the solution, just by not being political, you're part of the problem.
If you're not part of the solution, then you must be part of the problem. If you're not part of the solution, then you must be part of the problem. If you're not part of the solution, then you must be part of the problem.
When the whole thing exploded back in 1968, 69, I was straight into my mother-in-law's Mini, with Barbara, my wife, and up we went, and I was able to get past the barricades, knowing the back roads, and get over into the bog side, and get out and fling rocks at the soldiers with everyone else. And I did get involved in politics then, particularly with what subsequently became the official Republican movement. Oddly enough, it has never attracted me as a subject for art. It's a bit, I can't describe it very well, but it's a bit like a fight in the family. You don't want to bring it out into the public, A, and you don't really want to exploit it either. I mean, it was too tragic to be exploited.
Fear of making propaganda or making the work narrow or making it parochial. And this is all actually, I find it very nonsensical, because all art is propaganda in some sense, to one degree or another.
I really didn't like people who used it as the major subject for their art, people who were actually born and brought up there. I thought there's a level of exploitation when something is going on around you like that. But then I may be wrong, maybe it's the artists, maybe it's your duty, like Goya, to look without blinking at the horrors of war.
Most of the work I do is intense, because it's dealing with an intense situation, or it's dealing with people, ordinary human beings who find themselves in extreme situations. I'm not making the work to depress anybody. I mean, I'm making the work to raise questions.
In the early 80s, the murals were not too sophisticated, but very quickly the muralists developed skills and abilities, and one of the things I enjoy very much in the Republican murals is often the sense of humour that's included in the murals, which is, I find, largely absent in the loyalist murals, which tend to be just emblematic and have the Ulster flag or the red hand of Ulster or whatever.
A lot of the loyalist murals are actually, I would say, they actually show a kind of an uncertainty or a fear of change which has to happen at some point. And therefore a lot of the murals actually celebrate militarism and this kind of desire to continue the actions of their death squads, and so they tend to reflect their fear.
The Republican murals, I mean, the range of material they choose to depict. I remember one year I went up to judge a mural competition in West Belfast, and there was a mural of a Native American at the top of the White Rock Road, and there was an attempt to associate the struggle for freedom and justice of the North American Native North Americans with the Republicans in the North. There was also a mural of Bob Marley, which I asked the muralist, you know, what has Bob Marley got to do with the Irish struggle for freedom? And he said, nothing, I just like his music.
Emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy. None of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look helplessly? Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the proof. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? All I ever had.
As you asked me earlier on about where I think the peace process is going, I'm very confident that there will be a resolution of this conflict, and I hope that maybe one day, that very shortly, these type of murals will come to a close, that the agitprop type issues that we have to deal with will be resolved within the sort of process which is taking place. Maybe not this type of mural, but the very strong political imagery has helped us along the way towards that, and maybe we can all get ourselves a decent life in an ordinary job.
There is a tendency for people to romanticise armed struggle, and I'm never done trying to tell people that it's not romantic. There's nothing romantic about taking up armed struggle. I mean, it's ordinary people who have made a very conscious choice because they've been forced into a situation that this is the only way that's been left open. But it's for a political objective, and it arises out of a political situation, not a romantic one.
You can't be anything else. You can't have any other principle, thought or belief that doesn't begin with the thought that no aspiration, moral, political, or otherwise, justifies any violent step of any kind, whether that's killing people or punching them, frankly. It is always wrong in every case.
We didn't really want people to understand what was going on in the North, and censorship kept us ignorant, you know. And as long as there were bombs going off and they could say murderers, terrorists, thugs, criminals, etc., 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 we would timidly retreat into our shells, into our suburban houses, and we didn't want to understand, actually. So we were kept in a state of awful ignorance about what was going on in the North.
that I felt that kind of sense of grievance over, you know, because you were carrying this burden with your accent and with your unpredictability and your kind of fractious Irishness as it was perceived then, that you're a bit of a troublemaker, a potential troublemaker, and you know, you're constantly being watched by customs men at the boat, and you know, even policemen in London. You're just all the time on your guard. With good reason, I suppose, in that London was getting blown to bits, and so was Belfast and all the rest. But you also felt a sense of grievance in that this is not our problem alone, that we didn't create this. There was a sense of, no, you've got to acknowledge your part in it and allow me off this hook, because, you know, you kind of feel, well, I didn't partition the country. I didn't, you know, but at the same time, this was never being acknowledged. So there was a certain kind of paranoia, I think, that I was carrying as a teenager.
The North has been a terrible experience for the South as well as the North. Intellectually, it has damaged us in the South very seriously, because it destroyed intellectual opposition in this country, you know.
Any struggle, any war, is settled nearly in two ways. One is by absolute victory and defeat, right? So talk about the world wars or whatever. And the other one is by conflict resolution, which means negotiation.
After the ceasefire, the amounts of punishment assaults, so-called punishment assaults, where teenagers were beaten up or shot in the legs for accusations of burglary, taking drugs, stealing cars, it increased after the ceasefire. And what was very important and disturbing about that was that this was thus the paramilitary definition of peace. This is what happens when there's peace. This is what we do. This is what it's for. I think it's really hard to ignore.
The ceasefire might actually deprive Irish artists of one of their two possible cultural cliches that they can trade abroad on. But that's perhaps a very cynical attitude to take to the peace settlement. I would hope that it will force artists to maybe look at culture, the culture of Ireland and the society of Ireland with greater clarity rather than less clarity. I hope it will force us to look beyond the cliche.
I do believe that there is a price to be paid for peace, and it's a great deal to ask, because people on both sides have been murdered and tortured. The families of those people are going to have to accept closing the books on a loss. It cannot be equalized. We can't have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and it's going to have to be asked of people whose human rights were violated, whose mothers, fathers, children, brothers, sons were brutally butchered on both sides. They're going to have to simply close the book on that chapter and accept that we move ahead, including moving ahead with people who are at least politically responsible for some of these outrages. Otherwise, we're locked in the past.
Farewell, my child, it's time to leave this all behind. Changing rivers for the sea. Farewell to Saturday's child, cut loose before his prime, and set adrift in the city. Speak to me now of isolation. Spill your way home in the dark.
I made a film called Budawani, which was about a priest who impregnates a girl. I showed it myself in the Tiger in Galway, and I gathered that most of the audience consisted of priests and nuns in cities. They were very interested in it, but I got not very much feedback on it, except that I think people were delighted that such a film was made, because our traditional anti-clericalism had now been reformulated as a hatred of the church and priests, and that whole glue that had willy-nilly kept us together for 100 years when there was nothing else.
I think that despite the secularization of Ireland, Irish people and Irish culture is one based firmly in a spiritual attitude to life. Something that's missing, I think, in a lot of other countries.
Until recently, Catholicism was always seen as synonymous with Ireland, and we sort of pride ourselves as being some sort of great spiritual people. You know, that there's a kind of transcendent aspect to the Irish personality. You were educated to the imaginative world through the Catholic Church in many respects, and also through other cultural music and things. And, you know, while I acknowledge that for a lot of people, I mean, not for me, but for a lot of people, the Catholic Church also had a very repressive, negative effect. You know, we were born into this sort of imaginative culture, which I think feeds into your artistic life. And then suddenly, overnight, the Catholic Church sort of falls apart. You know, the various scandals, which have been appalling, have been revealed, and the Catholic Church has sort of lost its credibility and lost its place in Irish society very quickly.
In terms of religion, the senses of the Catholic Church, not just as a moral power and a social power, but has been hugely diminished, but also as an intellectual voice. It really doesn't occupy any of the intellectual life of the country anymore. That's diminished. Whether it exists and isn't confident, or whether they no longer have the people or the voices within their ranks to articulate an intellectual position that's engaging and interesting, I don't know, but that's completely come off the stage.
I think it's probably depressing in some ways because, you know, Holy Catholic Ireland was a dive really behind all of that, and now we know, you know, and we're not afraid to say it. And
the influence of the church has gone down so much in the last, I would say, 10 years and 20 years, but certainly in the last 10. And one of the things is that I do think that if you can't move with the times, you're not going to keep up with those you're supposed to keep up with. If you do move with the times, you might be seen to be denigrating that one thing you're supposed to be pushing anyway. Because you can't necessarily adapt religion for each time, and yet that is what they have been asked to do. And they have failed to do it anyway, either through willfully they don't want to do it, or they just don't seem to have the wherewithal to do it anyway. I don't know which. But they certainly haven't done it, with the result that I would think that the majority of young people don't give two hoots about the church. Is that a good thing? I think it's more a good thing than a bad thing. I definitely think it's more a good thing than a bad thing.
The Catholic Church really was just a big multinationalist corporation like Coca-Cola and Kodak. But at least with Coca-Cola and Kodak, you got a drink and a film for your camera. But with Catholicism, you just got a lot of guilt. Guilt.
I do think that when spiritual or moral leadership is completely and absolutely bereft of anything that anybody else does in their life, that's not necessarily that great. But by the same token, I'm not too worried that the church has lost its power. It has lost its power, and I don't give two hoots, frankly. I think let's see what happens next, you know.
I have mixed feelings about that, having been an anti-clerical person for most of my life, and having felt and realised the damage, the psychic damage that had been done to me and my contemporaries by a very repressive and totalitarian religion. And at the same time, I obviously had a sentimental regard for this glue that formed 50% of our culture, you know. So I suppose we have to get used to that. But at the same time, I've a feeling that we've thrown a lot of babies out with getting rid of that bathwater, because when I see the unbridled greed and that ensues after capitalism and globalism and internationalism and everything, I wish we had some kind of Islamic fundamentalism here to at least have some kind of slowing down process.
It's not very fashionable now to talk about the spirituality of Ireland. And there's a great sort of campaign to secularize the country, but it mustn't be forgotten how important religion and the spiritual side of life has been to Irish people.
When we got independence, we wanted to separate ourselves from like unholy England, and we became, partly in fact due to De Valera, who was our Tito really, he dominated Ireland, but you know, we became a very puritanical country, and I don't think that suited the Irish at all, because I don't think the Celtic spirit was puritanical in the least. I think the Irish are wild people, and I think we're going back to that. We're getting over that post-colonial hump of ultra-rigidity and forcing our own culture to be something different. I think we're relaxing a bit now, and I think just, you know, Catholicism being on the wane is so positive. It's so positive for women.
I mean, I never ever found it a disadvantage being a woman, I have to say, in making documentaries or working in any of these areas at all.
Many people have commented on the fact that there are so many contemporary women artists here who are doing really, really well, and that is a fact. And I think it may actually be related to the fact that there isn't really, or hasn't really been, a developed market, you know, for art here. So that whole kind of competition thing, you know, hasn't really been in play. So that, you know, women and men have the same opportunities, or had the same opportunities, let's say in the 70s and 80s, which was zero opportunities. You know, so everybody, you know, was on an even playing field. You know, so that kind of chauvinism that operates, you know, in well-developed markets, you know, didn't actually operate here. So everybody starts on a level playing field, and that's why all the good artists rise to the top, we hope.
For me, I don't feel that my work is particularly different because I'm a woman. I don't know, maybe other people would look at my work and would just say, yes, that's made by a woman. I don't know. But there seems to be a very strong group of women artists within Ireland, particularly working in three-dimensional work. I'm not sure why this is, but I feel if art is about discourse, well, I think women's art listens better. That could just be the mother relationship. I'm not sure, but I have found that a lot of the female art or women artists working here have a lot to say, and they say it very, very well. I did work on a lot of documentaries which were primarily about women, not particularly because I had a big thing about making documentaries about women, but because I thought it was an interesting way to look at society and changes in society, because sometimes if you take a specific group of people and you look at changes through their eyes, it can tell you a lot about those changes, but also about the broader society that you're looking at as well. I was working with a group of women in Connemara, and we worked together on a documentary called Images of Ourselves. And that, again, kind of looked at those changes, but this time in a more personalised way, in how you took a grandmother, her daughter and granddaughter, and how the changes that had happened through those generations in the lives of these women. I mean, there were 3 grandmothers in the programme who had 10, 11 and 12 children, to the huge change that happened with their daughters, who would have had far smaller families, to their granddaughters who are considering if they're going to have any families at all. So, I mean, those kind of changes, and then women would have never considered working outside the home, devoted their lives entirely to their families, to their daughters who wouldn't consider for a moment not working outside the home. So, I mean, that was an interesting idea as well. And it just showed those huge changes that had happened through 3 generations, from women who are still alive to their daughters, their granddaughters who would be starting off their lives.
In general, when I was growing up, they didn't offer us many female. I remember we had Florence Nightingale and Mother Teresa, and the idea of walking around like all these sick, wounded soldiers with a lamp never appealed to me, nor did wearing a veil and being an ultra-right-wing conservative in Kolkata promoting anti-contraceptive values in a country with a huge population. I always thought that was very immoral, so there really were no female role models, so you just had to make it up as you go along.
I see women now in their 30s and 40s, and they're beginning careers in the arts and making those kind of decisions. And I think that is brilliant. I like that. I like that confidence, that new confidence that you can say, okay, well, I want to do this and I'm going to do it, and I don't really care, what age I am or, what my circumstances are. I'm just going to do this for myself.
A lot of what's happened in Ireland over the last 10 or 20 years is to do with that sort of collision between, moving into a sort of modern Ireland, a kind of European, cosmopolitan Ireland, as opposed to the sort of rural basis that is somewhere embedded in our psyche.
People like me, when I look out, what I see of the Celtic Tiger is buildings, buildings, properties and cars. It may have produced more corporate buying of art, but I believe that corporate buying is still conservative, in other words, that it buys, two-dimensional, very colourful, perhaps abstract paintings that are framed for corporate, and, and they may not be taking a kind of adventurous line, of buying strange or, art that doesn't last 100 years or, so I would still be more or less in the same position maybe as I was, before the Celtic Tiger.
Regarding the Celtic Tiger and if it has affected the art world, I'm not so sure it has, because I feel it's, the marketplace is so concerned with the property market. That's what everybody's focusing on, and that's where all the money is going to. It's gone mad, it's gone crazy. And I don't think there is a large art collecting group here. I don't think people really collect art here. I think people are buying properties, they're not buying things to fill properties.
But what the Celtic Tiger has done, I think, for artists here is created perhaps a kind of mood of optimism, where people feel that they can do anything that they wish, really, and that they don't have to go, first of all, to England, which was the path, that most people took in the 50s and the 60s and 70s. It was the United States. So people, it is a great feeling that you can stay in your own country, that you can live in your own country, produce in your own country, and yet be known, and do projects in other countries. So that's what the Celtic Tiger has done for somebody like me.
We're in boomtown. We have one of the leading economies of the European Union. We provide 80% of the software technology for the European Union. We were, until recently, the second leading exporter of software in the world after the United States. We are now the leading software exporter. This is a quite extraordinary phenomenon.
I'm sure people go to Ireland now and are disappointed that everybody has a cellular phone. driving BMWs and a huge mortgage and drinking champagne and in Cafe and Sen. It's a different kind of Ireland from the old traditional quiet man Ireland. So that'll change, and people's perceptions of Ireland will change. I'm sure there'll be some disappointment, but overall, I mean, I wouldn't begrudge Ireland a bit of success. I mean, it's been an 800-year recession, and we've earned it.
I'm not saying that money is good. It can be terrible, and I think Ireland could become more materialistic, but I kind of say, what's wrong with that?
I mean, that's what Ireland always wanted to be. It always wanted to be economically secure and successful, and now that we've got it, there's so much anxiety about it, and there's an awful lot of guilt about it as well. I think it's a good thing.
When I see the great Egyptian architecture of the hotels going up, I am a little afraid, and I'm anxious for the hubris, as the Greeks might call it, of this sudden change produced by money. A skyline changing, cranes on the skyline like great predators. I mean, don't misunderstand me, I'm jubilant for the reality of the change. But I do think that if you ask me what I miss a sense of fear or caution or a veteran's awareness of this planet.
In relation to the Celtic Tiger and our new burgeoning economy here, in a way we deserve it. We haven't had that rich a history, and you know, it's good that the country is enjoying this wealth. I don't think handling it all that well.
The Celtic Tiger means that I can't afford to buy a flat or a house, even in my mid-30s and on a salary from the Abbey Theatre, because the place has become so inflated that house prices are kind of, it'd be literally cheaper to buy somewhere in Paris, in central Paris. So there is a genuine economic boom, but more suspiciously there is a kind of an inflated kind of perceptual boom, so that people, you know, like landlords think, oh well, we're all doing well, therefore I can afford to kind of raise things, or so the prices are going up and up and up and up, and it's not actually necessarily underpinned by any manufacturing base or anything like that. Restaurants are opening right, left and centre, but they're closing right, left and centre. Hotels are so while it's energizing and energetic, I have a rather pessimistic notion that it's not underpinned by anything solid, it's not underpinned by reality, and it's screwing a lot of people right, left and centre, while a lot of people make a lot of quick money and get the hell out whenever it all falls apart.
It's a mixed blessing, you know, it really is. It's wonderful that people are making a living. It's wonderful that fewer young people are going away. Travelling is something that Irish young people are doing now because they want to do it. They're going to America for a year, or they're going to Australia for a year, or they're travelling the world the way Europeans have been for ages. The downside of it is that I seem to notice a lot more homeless people. I certainly notice a lot more homeless young people. I find it very hard to deal with the closing down of hospital wards at a time when we live in unprecedented prosperity.
One of the byproducts, it seems to me, of this buoyant economy, which I refuse to refer to as the Celtic Tiger, has been a growth in materialism, which I find a bit distressing. Everything, what's the famous Oscar Wilde phrase? We know the price of everything and the value of nothing, and that seems to be growing on an almost daily basis here. it's not the money that's the sin, it's the love of money that's the problem. And if that's the only goal we have, we're in danger. I think I'm certainly not the only one who is worried that with the commercialization, if you like, of Irish society, that Irish soul is being a little shade of grey passing over it and in danger.
Ireland, from being a people that was always kind of, it's all right, and we're all a bit, pretty down on ourselves and very lacking in self-confidence. It's gone to the other extreme. Irish self-confidence has gone to the stage where it's arrogance, effectively. In the 80s, when everybody was emigrating, I felt very committed to staying here. And yet now, when people are returning to Ireland, when we have immigrants coming to Ireland, when Ireland is perceived to be an economically booming community, for the first time in my life, I would feel the impetus to leave. In a sense, the Ireland that we all knew and loved, I think, is gone.
The nature of our ambition has shifted. I think that there was a time when our ambition was to be a good member of a community. That was our ambition, was to be a successful member of a family and to be a successful member of the community, to help and be involved in the community. And nowadays I think success in Ireland is determined more by the nature of your mortgage, your address, the number of cars, the quality of car, and those kind of things. And we've bought into the American dream 100%, and I'm not too sure that I like it.
I love America, her secret's safe with me, and I know her wicked ways, the parts you never see.
We haven't quite woken up to the fact that we are an utter, absolute cultural, economic colony of the United States. 60% of our industry is directly controlled by the United States multinational corporations. So we're Americans, and we might as well lie down and let our bellies be tickled by Americans, because that's our fate and our destiny, and we have already abandoned any idea that we might have some unique ancestral identity. That was beaten out of us in the last 25 years by censorship.
Oh, Supergirl, you'll be my supermodel, although you have a reputation. Can I afford to move above my station? I'm not the only heart you call.
The children watched, or teenagers watched Friends non-stop, Simpsons non-stop, and it's become part of the speech patterns to say, check it out, and love you, and whatever is the big one, isn't it? And it's just almost like the sort of rising intonation of, you got it yet?
Generally, I think we always have been a figment of the American imagination, and that has now come almost true. It's not imaginary anymore.
If we're constantly fed the Hollywood ideal, you wonder about 14-year-old, 13-year-old kids watching that, having to aspire to be that beautiful, having to aspire to being that successful, or aspiring to so much drama within one person's life. I would just hope that that isn't going to become so overpowering that you don't have indigenous independent filmmakers still coming out and actually reflecting something of the life they know, or if they've found out about, or or is the roller coaster going to crush us all?
It's the erosion of local culture, I think, is one of the worst things that is happening in the world. Every time a language disappears, every time a particular attitude to life disappears, every time a native drink disappears and is substituted by some all-purpose international sugar water, I weep.
When I went to live in rural Ireland 5 years ago, I became actually very aware of the fear that exists of outsiders. And when societies are very compact, and they have been for generations, and you know, as far back as people can remember, when people move into those kind of societies, it generates a lot of fear. People are very fearful of people who come from different cultures and different societies, who do things differently. And their fear really is that somehow it's going to affect their society and the way that they have always lived.
Certainly, Ireland has never been a country before that I've known where immigration is either an issue or a problem or a great thing. And that's what it is now. It's all those three things at the moment. And I don't think Ireland has any idea how to deal with it.
We seem to have a problem at the moment in this country with a lot of immigrants coming in, and we feel it as a threat. It's ironic that 15 years ago I made a series of films and wrote a book called Atlantean, in which I speculated that the Aboriginal people of this country were from North Africa and the Middle East, and of course I was described as lunatic, idiosyncratic, and some people were very insulted because it undermined the homogenous Irish-speaking Celtic Catholic nation that we were. And now, of course, when all of these wonderful people are coming in from Africa, North Africa, Romania, it's wonderful. And so we're suddenly being confronted with these strange foreign people. Now, for instance, we've accepted strange foreign people called English and American for centuries, it seems. But because these people have a different language, some have a different skin, we're being confronted with the racism which has been inherent in us for years.
We always had a reputation for being welcoming. The Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes. And we were among the most generous people in Europe when we had nothing. Now, the Celtic Tiger, we have something, and a lot of us are greedily putting our arms out and saying, you're not getting any of mine. And I think that is terrible. We also are racist. We didn't think we were, because we were a uniquely homogeneous society in Europe. It was assumed that everybody was white, Roman Catholic, nationalist, and heterosexual. Well, some of us weren't, but that didn't spoil the picture, particularly for the majority.
I think it was kind of ridiculous previously that it was the land of hospitality, Céad Míle Fáilte, you know, everyone's welcome. Now we're saying you're not at all welcome if you're not white and you're not loaded and you're coming from America bailing us out somehow, or you're from the European community building us new roads. If you're a refugee or you're coming from some country hoping for political asylum, really, you just want to be as tough as old boots to deal with this, the kind of racism that was always there, I'm assuming, but never had the opportunity to show itself in its true colours.
I don't think that people are really racist as such, but they are very fearful. And when I see what they're doing now, I find it intriguing that they are busing people out of Dublin and putting them into these small rural communities. And it's like all those things that I saw 5 years ago, which have actually got significantly better over those 5 years. There is much more understanding, and people have begun to accept outsiders. And now I see that they're just doing exactly the same thing again, and, you know, sort of transporting people into small rural communities. And you actually begin to understand the fear that that generates in a small community, because people just feel they're going to be overrun.
If an asylum seeker, a Nigerian, or a Congolese, or indeed a Vietnamese, is found to be involved in drug smuggling, or in the rape of a woman, it suddenly becomes an issue. You know, Vietnamese rapist on the loose, Congolese kidnapper, gang riot, all this sort of stuff. And it tends to stir up hostility against the entire community. I think that's very, very dangerous. In the little gym that I go to, for example, the owner has a habit of referring to niggers and wogs and so on. I always challenge it, because I can see it spreading like an infection. And once the language gets corrupted, behavior follows.
France, Germany, all the other European countries have for years had to deal with immigration, had to deal with people coming in from the poorer parts of the world. And now it's our turn. And the response of some people to this has been, I think, very depressing. There's naked racism has been expressed. And the reality is, whether anyone likes it or not, these people are here to stay. I mean, this is not a problem that's going to go away. So I would like to think that we would be mature about it and welcome these people, and we could all learn to live together instead of engaging in hatred and bigotry.
I always feel that human rights are most important when you're trying to extend them to people who are not like yourself, who have irritating behavior patterns, of whose appearance you disapprove. Because it is so easy to give human rights to people who are made in your own image. The real test is if you're prepared to give those kind of human rights to people with whom you disagree.
I think, you know, in some ways this issue will just work itself out because people will learn to accept difference and learn to actually appreciate difference as well, which I think has begun to happen already in rural areas where that fear existed 5 years ago.
Founders of the Irish state actually were poets and playwrights more than revolutionaries. And the actual revolution which founded Ireland was more or less a sort of military catastrophe, but it was an imaginative triumph. In Ireland, the past and the present coexist all the time. I mean, Ireland is, you know, it's almost a cliche to say, but Ireland effectively has always been an imagined place. Maybe this is because we were dispossessed of the land, maybe it was because of the terrible Brits taking the land away from us, that the only thing we had left was our imagination. And therefore I think Irish people in general have always preserved an image of Ireland in their mind, which is often removed from the Ireland of the present. And I think that's even, you know, obviously becoming more and more important now as Ireland changes.
There were a couple of things that had to be got rid of in this country. One of them was our kind of fundamentalist religious approach and our ethical approach and our guilty consciences. They had to be got rid of because they are an obstacle to business. And the second thing that had to be got rid of was our kind of autonomous national identity, because that's an obstacle to globalism and globalization and global capitalism. Those are two things that are fundamentally dangerous to a homogenizing of everybody into consumer culture.
You know, I think we could be a very ordinary country and in this newfound affluence indulge ourselves in the champagne and cellular phones and skiing holidays and real estate speculation that we feel we so deserve after an 800-year recession. But I also think we could be an extraordinary country and spread some of this newfound wealth around, make sure it's more evenly distributed and not just kept to a high-tech middle class, and to treat the people who are coming to Ireland to look for work with courtesy and respect and understanding that we would have liked to have received when we went abroad to look for work. We didn't always get it, but I don't know if we can give it in Ireland either. And I think that'll be the test of this new affluent Ireland. If we can do that, that will make all this recent triumph over this long, bitter history, then it will mean something if we can do it. Otherwise, I think we're just lost in a very materialistic, commercial culture that Ireland could become, which would be a shame.
If one's to salvage anything, kind of from the ruins of corporate Ireland, you know, there is an onus on us to try and recapture other aspects of Ireland, the cultural aspect, the imaginative aspect, the spiritual aspect of Irishness, so that that can run and catch up with the economic, the practical boom which is happening.